Governor Jack Markell is our first person this week. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us, Governor.
My pleasure.
We know you have a lot on your plate right now, putting together a budget being one of them.
And earlier this week, DFAC lowering estimates for state revenue. Does that really throw a wrench in the works? How does that affect the budget process?
It's always a challenge when there's less. We've been through this a number of times. You know, the irony this time is that the economy is actually doing a little bit better. We created over 8,000 jobs last year, outperformed the country according to the Department of Labor. But some of our revenue line items are not really that sensitive to the economy. So there was a big refund to a corporate income tax player. There was a reduction in the estate tax. Of course, the gaming revenues continue to be challenged, so some issues like that.
In your budget proposal, it seems like it all hinges on your plan to move money from the general fund to the Transportation Trust Fund, replace that money with a 10-cent increase in the gas tax. Was making the budget sort of hinge on that, sort of a way to kind of force lawmakers to get it passed if they wanted the budget to be approved?
Well, if they want any kind of reasonable capital program for our roads and bridges, we're going to have to bring additional revenue in, and that's been clear for a long time. You know, the challenge is that there's no industry that can be successful if you have expenses that grow with inflation, but you have revenues that don't. And that's really been the problem. And so the Transportation Fund, it's funded by the gas tax, document fees, and tolls. And the gas tax hasn't increased since 1995, and $1 in 1995 is worth 65 cents today. So we're just going to have to figure out some way to invest in our roads and bridges, because the bottom line is that Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia are all making big investments in their transportation systems. And if we want to keep up and be competitive, we need to as well.
So is your gas tax proposal a rebuilding of our infrastructure plan, or do you see it as a jobs plan?
It's a great question, and it's both. I mean, there's no question that businesses want to be located in places where there's strong infrastructure, but it also creates thousands of jobs. The Federal Highway Administration estimates that for every $1 billion, you create 13,000 jobs when it comes to roads. So I'm proposing an additional $500 million. So it's thousands of jobs. It's great for jobs, but just as importantly, it's important for jobs in the future. Mm-hmm. We have to invest in our transportation system for the purposes of public safety, for the purposes of reducing congestion, and for economic development. And so all of those three things fit together.
I mean, but a gas tax isn't exactly popular. So is there a contingency plan in place should it not be passed?
Well, no, I mean, this is not a popularity contest. And nothing would make me happier than if the gas tax or other funding mechanisms had come into place over the last 20 years. But they haven't. Mm-hmm. So when you have an issue, you know, my job, and the reason people elect us, is to say, okay, how's the world changing? What does that mean for Delaware? What are the challenges we face, and what are we going to do about it? So I'd be perfectly happy, believe me, as an elected official. None of us likes to go to the public and say, well, we think you ought to pay more for this or that. But the bottom line is we need to make sure we have the revenue in order to make our roads and bridges better. So there's not particularly a plan B. I mean, if it doesn't happen, then we're going to have a very small capital program.
So in a year where a good chunk of the General Assembly is up for re-election in the fall, is your ability to convince what are majority Democrat majorities in both chambers that this is worth doing and needs to be done? Is that sort of a test of your leadership ability? Do you see it that way?
Well, I mean, I think it's always a challenge, and I think these are any time that you ask people to pay more for anything, it's a challenge. I understand that, and I think you know, and a governor can't do this alone. I mean, I am very active these days. I'm making the presentation all over the state to many different groups, explaining it. And the response from the public is, and I say to the public that my hope is that when I leave, you say, well, I sort of wish he didn't tell me that, but now that I understand the facts, this proposal makes as much sense as anything else. And I'm getting a lot of that. You know, whether or not a majority or the necessary number of people in the General Assembly vote for it in the end, I don't know. We'll have to see. But I'm going to continue to make the pitch, because whether it's the investment in roads or whether it's cleaning up our water or dealing with all the flooding issues, again, these are problems that exist. We can pretend they don't exist, and we could do nothing. I mean, at some point, somewhere, something's going to happen. Either somebody else later is going to vote to fix it, or our water's going to, in the case of the water's going to get dirty. We're going to have more flooding. And I think it's just irresponsible to say to the next generation, we understood what the problems were, we knew how to fix them, but we refused to. And besides that, in terms of financial responsibility, we know, back on roads, the cost of fixing a road once it has deteriorated is 5 times more expensive than maintaining it as you go. We know that. So are we just going to pretend that we don't know that, and we're going to say, well, we don't want to ask anybody to pay for anything? And I also think it's important for people to understand. Kiplinger's, which is a big national publication, came out recently. They looked at the tax burden in all 50 states, tax burden on local residents. Delaware was number 1. We want to keep it low, but we also know we have to make these investments.
You transitioned us into clean water. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why has it taken this long for anything to really even be proposed? It hasn't, of course, been passed yet, but why is it taking this long and the state of Delaware's water been allowed to get so bad for so long?
So first of all, again, nothing would make me happier than if it had been cleaned up over the years. And there has been some progress. The Clean Water Act, for example, did help. But as I said in my State of the State, I think it's embarrassing and unacceptable that the huge majority of our waterways are not fishable or swimmable. And what that specifically means is that the legal limit for many of our waterways in terms of how many fish you can eat in a year is 1 or maybe 2. I'm not talking about in a week or a month, I'm talking about in a year. And so again, we know how to fix it. I think it's always good if we had fixed these kinds of things earlier. I think to some extent we now have some technologies that didn't exist before. For example, in Mirror Lake and Dover, all kinds of PCBs. It would take about 40 years normally to clean that up. But because of a new technology that we're just deploying now, where we inject carbon pellets in the PCBs and bind to the carbon pellets, it's going to be cleaned up in about three years instead.
There are some who are closely watching this proposal, like the folks who live near the Vlasic pickle plant in Millsboro. That's sort of in the process of transitioning into a chicken processing plant. They're watching what you say about cleaning the Delaware's water and wondering if going forward there will be more of a focus on preventing future dirtying of Delaware's water when it comes to things like the pickle plant and the Indian River.
Well, if you take the pickle plant and the chicken plant that Harem that's offered to purchase it, they're going to be spending a very significant amount of money to clean up the water. And so, they know about the issues, and this is not an art, this is a science. They know what they have to do, and they've made a commitment that they're going to clean it up. We need a strong economy and we need a good environment. These things are not inconsistent. And in fact, if anything, I think they very much go together.
Well, are existing corporations that some blame for a lot of the pollution and toxicity that's in the waters, how are they going to be held accountable?
So first of all, the fact is most of the industrial caused pollutants are from like 40 years ago. Because since the Clean Water Act, that's gotten cleaned up a lot. So in terms of the amount of the pollution these days that's coming from industrial users, it's actually just a few percent. And so they'll have to pay. The proposal is, in terms of how we fund the cleanup, is a bit less than $1 a week for most houses, about $45 a year. For big industrial users, it would go up, that would be capped at $25,000. But it's not quite as, it would be nice and simple if you said, okay, well, just go after all the, the big, industries that are really polluting our water now. That's just not how it works. The fact is, all of us are contributing in one form or another.
Is there enough, do you have enough political capital in the General Assembly to get both the clean water, the $45 fee a year, and the 10-cent gas tax done, or is it going to be maybe one or the other?
Well, I'm working as hard as I can to explain both proposals, but I do think this is one where a governor, whoever the governor is, can't do it on his or her own. I mean, the fact is, this is why I'm out talking to members of the public, talking to members of the General Assembly. I think these are difficult asks that I'm making. I understand that they're difficult, but the choices, this is all compared to what? And so in both cases, we know that we're creating a lot of jobs, good jobs. We know that the money would be spent throughout the state. And we know that the alternative is our water gets, in the case of the water, our water gets, doesn't get any cleaner. And we continue to have these flooding problems. In the case of the roads, our roads don't get, we don't invest in safety, we don't invest in congestion, we don't invest in economic development. So I think, this is it's on sort of one hand or the other. And I think in this case, I mean, and we're not being the least bit dismissive about what the impact is on the people of Delaware. But the fact is, just as there have been people who have invested during their lifetimes before us so that we could have a better life, so we could have a better environment, so that we could have a road system, we have to make some of those investments as well for them and, for that matter, for ourselves. We know, for example, that when Amazon chose to go to Middletown, they did so because the infrastructure was there. We have a situation in Georgetown where there's an airport down there. If the runway were extended by another 500 feet, 757s could fly in, and a company, Pat's Aircraft, which renovates aircraft, they would build a new hangar, and they would hire another 100 to 150 people. I mean, very clear economic development opportunities as a result of these investments.
Let's go to a little bit of a rapid fire section here and get some updates from you on things we've had you in to talk about before, just to kind of get the status of them. Short answers here. On Fisker, there's been some movement in that. What's the state of them?
I think there's still uncertainty. I mean, I think we know a little bit more than we did before, because we know the buyer is a company from China, Wansheng, and we've been in touch with them, but they still have some decisions to make. They do seem interested in building cars. Again, they've said that if there's enough demand, the second generation car, would be something they'd be interested in doing in Delaware. No commitments, and I think still some uncertainty.
How about the steel mill, Claymont, closed down? Any movement on that?
Nothing I can talk about. Discussions. I can't say which way it's going to go. It would be certainly great to get people working there again, but I can't be any more specific today.
And that's a Russian. Evraz is a Russian. Does that have any geopolitical?
I don't think so.
Any global impact?
They decide. I mean, unfortunately, they were losing a lot of money at that plant. The kind of steel that they were making at that plant, it's really a commodity these days, and they just weren't making any money. In fact, they were losing money, so they decided to shut it down.
Direct mail's going out now to homeowners saying, let's get this death penalty repeal bill out of committee. Let's get it a full up or down vote in the House. Where do you stand?
I've been following it very closely. I've been talking to a lot of people who have come in to see me on both sides. I'm keeping my counsel at this moment, but I will certainly be following it very closely as it continues. I also have a perspective on the issue, having served on the Board of Pardons for 10 years and having dealt with a number of death penalty cases, and as governor as well. I've had, as you may remember, last year I did commute a death sentence. So I think these are very hard issues.
Okay, well, we are wrapping up, but we have to mention your haircut.
Well, please do.
Reason behind the new look, we like it.
Well, I decided I was sick of pretending that I really had much I have to be careful how I say this, that I had much hair on the top of my head, and I was always doing something crazy, and finally I went to the barber. I said, make it short, and here I am. So it's a whole new me, but I don't have to spend much time brushing it, I can tell you that.
Carla's happy with it?
I took her a little bit to adjust to, but I think she thinks it was probably the smart decision.
All right, well, we are out of time. Thanks, Governor Markell, for sitting down with us as always. This segment can also be found online at newsworks.org/Delaware.